Have you ever witnessed a moment so shocking, so brazenly unfair, that you felt the world spin on its axis? Picture this. An elderly black gentleman, dapper in his grey suit and hat, quietly settles into his seat on a bustling airplane. Within minutes, security storms down the aisle. He's ordered off the plane for no clear reason. Passengers watch, stunned and horrified, as he's escorted away like a criminal. But as he shuffles off, the elderly man takes out his phone and makes a single call that will unravel a $4 billion secret. This is the jaw-dropping tale of respect, revenge, and redemption. You won't believe Solomon Green was a man of quiet dignity. At 76 years old, he'd lived through every era of America's turbulent history, from the segregation of the 1950s to the civil rights marches of the 1960s to the breakthroughs of the 21st century. The lines on his face told stories of love loss and resilience. Even his posture, always upright, hinted at a spirit that had faced down adversity for decades and refused to yield. He was visiting Atlanta for a very simple reason: to finalize a philanthropic deal with a local community college, something he did often through the charitable foundation he chaired. Solomon had chosen to return home on the newly established Starwind Airlines, a company that prided itself on offering top-notch service. He had heard they were forging strategic partnerships with large philanthropic organizations, so naturally, he believed that supporting them would be in line with his own charitable values. Usually he flew first class, but this time, due to a schedule mix-up, he ended up in business class. Solomon wasn't one to fuss about seating. The comfort of the seat wasn't his main priority. He just needed to get home, greet his grandkids, and rest after a busy week. That afternoon, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was its usual chaotic self, with throngs of people hustling through terminal gates. Despite the crowd, Solomon managed to maintain his calm. He shuffled down the terminal, immaculately dressed in a grey tweed suit, polished black shoes, and a matching fedora. He always believed in looking his best, a habit passed down from his father. He had his carry-on bag in one hand and a small gift, handcrafted wooden figurines he purchased for his grandchildren in the other. There was a subtle glint in his eyes, reflecting his satisfaction at how productive his trip had been, boarding for Starwind Airlines. Flight 279 to New York began on time. Solomon took his seat in 5B, put his carry-on beneath the seat in front of him, and placed the wrapped figurines carefully on his lap. He had been up early that morning, so he leaned back, closed his eyes, and let his mind wander to memories of his wife who had passed away a decade ago. He reminisced about how they used to travel the world together. He'd always insisted they sit together by the window, sharing quiet moments above the clouds. Suddenly, the overhead speaker crackled. A flight attendant's cordial voice announced, "Ladies and gentlemen will be taking off shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and stow your belongings as we prepare for departure." Solomon politely complied, sliding the figurines under the seat. Everything seemed so normal and routine. The plane was nearly filled, the last few passengers filing in. Solomon exchanged pleasantries with a younger woman seated next to him, who smiled and introduced herself as Alicia. They chatted about the weather, about how Atlanta was unusually cool that time of year, and how quickly the lines at the airport moved. Then from behind them, there was a sudden commotion. A couple of voices raised in protest. Solomon barely paid attention at first. Incidents on airplanes had become almost commonplace in the news. It could have been something trivial, but the intensity of the voices grew louder, radiating tension through the cabin. He turned his head to see, but from his seat it was difficult to discern precisely what was happening. Moments later, a tall man in a Starwind Airlines uniform, accompanied by 2 airport security officers, strode down the aisle with tense expressions. The flight attendant's voice came once more over the speaker, a forced calm in her tone. "We are currently investigating a disruption. Please remain seated until further notice." Passengers who'd already sat up in alarm were now hushed into an uneasy silence. The security officers halted at row 5, where Solomon sat. He felt his heart jolt. Was there an emergency near him? One of the officers pointed directly at Solomon. The tall man in the airline uniform, later identified as Mr. Daniels, the flight's lead steward, stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sir," he said, his gaze flicking to Solomon, "we've received a complaint regarding your behavior, and we need you to deplane." A stunned hush fell around them. Solomon's mind raced. What complaint could someone possibly have made about him? He'd done nothing but quietly take his seat. The woman next to him, Alicia, sat frozen, her eyes shifting between Solomon and the security officers, her jaw slack with disbelief. "Is there some misunderstanding?" Solomon asked calmly, maintaining the composure he had cultivated his entire life. "I haven't spoken to anyone but the flight attendant at the door, and Ms. Alicia here next to me." One of the security guards, a wide-framed man with a stern countenance, stiffened. "Sir, we're here to escort you off. Let's handle this peacefully." Though his voice was level, it was laced with an implied threat of force. If Solomon resisted, the entire scene felt surreal. Passengers began murmuring in confusion. Alicia turned to Mr. Daniels. "Excuse me, but I've been next to this gentleman the whole time. He hasn't caused any disturbance at all." Mr. Daniels took a moment, looking somewhat conflicted, but he continued in a strained voice. "We have a complaint, and protocol requires us to act. Please gather your things." The instructions felt like a punch to Solomon's gut. He'd been in plenty of tense moments in his life, but never one so public and humiliating. Never had he imagined being targeted so openly, without explanation. Realizing there was little choice, he reached for his carry-on, sliding out into the aisle. Heads craned to watch him as he passed, some with pity, others with confusion, and a few with thinly veiled judgment. The overhead lights seemed harsh and unkind, magnifying the sense of injustice that thickened the cabin air. As he followed the security officers, one on either side of him, past rows of bewildered onlookers, Solomon maintained his head high. An older gentleman in 7F, an African-American man with grey dreadlocks, called out, "This is wrong," another passenger demanded. "What did he do?" But no answers were given. Mr. Daniels repeated that there had been a complaint about threatening behavior. A wave of indignation rippled through the cabin. By the time Solomon was halfway up the aisle, his mind was brimming with a sense of déjà vu, shadows of a past where being a black man in a predominantly white space could trigger suspicion, fear, or immediate condemnation. Yet this was 2025, an era in which so many believed the world was beyond blatant discrimination, and here he was, singled out, humiliated, and powerless to stop it. Outside the aircraft, the two security guards led him into the jet bridge. A Starwind Airlines manager with a tight bun and a name tag that read, "Ms. Fletcher," awaited him. She stepped forward with a forced professional veneer. "Mr. Green, we apologize for the inconvenience, but it seems there was a complaint from another passenger who felt uncomfortable with you on board. We have to ensure the safety and comfort of all our customers." Solomon inhaled slowly, containing his anger. "Do you see any reason for me to be escorted off like this?" His voice cracked with hurt. "I have done nothing. I am a paying customer, just like everyone else." Ms. Fletcher's eyes flickered with a mixture of sympathy and exasperation, as though she, too, doubted the validity of the complaint, but felt bound by some faceless corporate policy, "We are investigating, sir. In the meantime, you will have to wait in the terminal lounge until we can resolve this." Solomon clenched his hands, noticing how unsteady they felt. "This is a disgrace," he murmured. "You have no grounds." She offered a placating smile that did nothing to soften the severity of what had just happened. "We're simply following protocol." The sight of the plane door shutting behind him felt like a final betrayal, an exclamation mark on the humiliating ordeal. Behind that door were the stares of 100 strangers who'd witnessed him treated like a criminal, and he knew from a lifetime of experiences how quickly perceptions could shift. A man removed by security must have done something wrong, must have threatened. Someone must have had a reason to be forced off the plane. Yet Solomon knew the truth. He had done nothing. Deep in his chest, an anger simmered, an anger that had been kindled by decades of living as a man of color. In America, never quite free from the specter of prejudice, but there was something more urgent stirring a quiet fury that said, "Not this time, not anymore." He'd seen discrimination and injustice, but he would not let it stand without consequences. As soon as Solomon was led back into the terminal, he calmly pulled out his phone. The security officers loomed watchfully, expecting perhaps a confrontation or a meltdown. But Solomon made one simple call, a call that would set in motion a chain of events that neither Starwind Airlines nor the world would forget. And so began the extraordinary tale of how an ordinary-looking elderly man, singled out unfairly, found the power to shake a corporate giant to its core. The injustice had been done, but the twist Solomon Green was no ordinary passenger. He was a quietly influential titan whose philanthropic organization had invested billions in multiple companies, some of which had direct ties to Starwind Airlines. By the time the day was done, the airline would be forced to confront its darkest prejudices, risking one of the largest financial disasters in its history. Little did they know. They had not just removed a man, they had awakened a force. Standing near gate A21, the chaotic murmur of the airport swirling around him, Solomon dialed a number from memory. His voice was calm, but there was an undertone of urgency. The name that showed up on his screen read Frederick Jacobs. Frederick was more than an old friend. He was one of the leading executives of a major private equity firm in New York. That firm had extensive dealings with global airlines, including Starwind. Solomon had personally steered part of his philanthropic foundation's endowment into the firm years ago, an endowment worth billions to promote philanthropic-minded business expansions. Ironically, Starwind had been championed as an example of an airline promising more inclusive hiring practices, environmental responsibility, and philanthropic partnerships. They had once been the shining star in a portfolio that Solomon and Frederick curated for social good. When Frederick answered, Solomon explained in measured tones what had just transpired. There was a pause on the other end. Then Frederick's voice, usually collected, cracked with outrage. "They did what? On what grounds?" Frederick's question hung in the air, the disbelief echoing across the phone line. Solomon exhaled a shaky breath. "They claim a passenger complained about me, making them uncomfortable. They put me off the plane without any explanation other than that they're following policy." Frederick's tone was grim and resolute. "Say no more. Let me see what strings I can pull. This is unacceptable." In the background, the hustle of travelers' announcements over the PA system, and the hum of flight engines seemed to fade into a dull roar. Solomon's gaze drifted beyond the expansive windows to where the planes taxied across the tarmac. A storm was brewing inside him, decades of pent-up frustration, with systemic injustice swirling in his mind. This was not just about him. It was about every quiet, unassuming person who'd ever been ejected or mistreated for simply existing in someone else's space. He had the means to make a statement, and he felt a moral imperative to act. The moment he ended the call, Ms. Fletcher approached him, flanked by 2 new staff members. She handed him a ticket for a later flight. "Mr. Green," she said with barely concealed nervousness in her voice, "we've arranged for you to travel on our evening flight in first class, free of additional charges. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience." Solomon stared at the ticket. So that was their solution, a forced wait of 8 hours in the airport, then a seat upgrade as compensation for the humiliation. He peered at Ms. Fletcher. "I appreciate the apology, but this is not about a seat upgrade. This is about the principle of what's just occurred." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I've never in my life been so embarrassed. You have no evidence of any wrongdoing. You don't even know who complained or what the complaint entailed." She swallowed hard. "We're working on verifying the details. Unfortunately, the flight had to depart on time." "So?" Of course, Solomon interrupted gently. "Can you at least tell me who made the complaint?" Miss Fletcher shook her head. "We cannot disclose passenger information." Solomon's shoulders squared. He sighed and stepped away, feeling the weight of this moment pressing into his chest. He wouldn't argue further with people who were just following orders. He had bigger moves to make. As Mrs. Fletcher and the staff retreated, they left him alone in the terminal's lounge area. With each passing minute, more travelers arrived to wait for their flights, some giving him curious glances. He could almost imagine the rumor that might be circulating. Some old black man got thrown off a plane, must have done something crazy, must have threatened someone right. A short while later, Alicia, the young woman who had been seated next to him, rushed up breathlessly. She looked around as if expecting an ambush of security. "Sir, I'm sorry for barging in like this, but I wanted to check if you're okay." Her eyes shone with genuine concern. That was ridiculous. "You did nothing?" Everyone on the plane was confused. Solomon managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, I'm all right." Surprised. "Hurt, but I'm all right. They gave me a ticket for a later flight." She huffed, face pink with anger. "Unbelievable. I've already posted on social media about this. People need to know. I have photos of when they escorted you off. If you want them, I can send them to you." She lowered her voice. "I overheard a few people saying the passenger who complained was a middle-aged man in first class who muttered about you being suspicious. That's the word someone used. Suspicious. Can you imagine?" A cold chill skimmed along Solomon's spine. The notion that someone looked at him and saw suspicion was a sharp reminder of the prejudice woven into society's fabric. "Thank you, Alicia," he said with warmth. "I appreciate you going out of your way for this." They exchanged phone numbers. Alicia promised she'd share any updates or evidence that might help. Then, with a wave and a final apology for the injustice, she hurried off to catch her connecting flight. Meanwhile, Solomon sank into one of the lounge chairs, the phone in his hand, buzzing incessantly calls from his staff. From lawyers, from Frederick News was moving fast, and Starwind Airlines wouldn't know what hit them. While waiting for Frederick to get back to him with updates, Solomon found his thoughts drifting to the past. He was raised by parents who survived Jim Crow laws in rural Georgia. His father had faced discrimination at nearly every turn, from being denied loans at local banks to being forced to use separate facilities. Yet he always held his head high, telling young Solomon, "Remember, son, dignity is not given by them. Dignity is claimed by us. With time, Solomon excelled academically. He won scholarships, traveled abroad, and eventually pursued business. Early in his career, he witnessed how certain people would treat him differently when he walked into a boardroom as the only black man in sight. Some would mistake him for the help, handing him coffee orders or directions to the copy machine. Others would quietly second-guess his competence. Over decades, Solomon had endured microaggressions, overt racism, and the subtle erasures that told him he didn't belong. Yet with unyielding resolve, he built a network of allies, made wise financial decisions, and amassed a fortune. Much of his success was funneled into his philanthropic foundation, dedicated to educational reform, community upliftment, and anti-discrimination initiatives. He had witnessed progress over the years, yet the events of that day proved something else. Old prejudices and stereotypes still lurked in modern corners. The fact that one paranoid passenger could spin a lie or an exaggeration and see him dragged off a plane by security was disheartening. As Solomon revisited these memories, his phone buzzed again, yanking him back to the present. Frederick's voice came over the line, tense and urgent. "I've spoken with our partners. We have a significant stake in Starwind Airlines through our development fund. Their board is being notified as we speak." Solomon nodded, even though Frederick couldn't see him. "How big is that stake currently?" Frederick sucked in a breath. "After our last adjustment, it's roughly $4 billion in combined assets, and that includes direct investment in their expansions and joint ventures. If we pull out, they'll lose that capital and face a catastrophic blow to their market position. Word in the industry would spread like wildfire." Solomon's lips tightened. He wasn't one for vengeance, but this was more than personal. "Frederick, make it known that we are considering pulling that entire investment. I want Starwind's leadership to understand the gravity of what they've done. Not just to me, but to the principles we stand for." Frederick paused. "Are you sure this is going to be nuclear? We'll have to shift those funds somewhere else quickly. Also, there may be backlash in the press and from corporate heads if we're perceived as punishing them without due process." A flicker of uncertainty coursed through Solomon, but he steadied himself, recalling the humiliation on that plane. They forcibly removed an elderly man of color over a baseless accusation. They need accountability. I'm not playing games. Let's see how quickly they change their tune when the cost of discrimination hits their bottom line. Frederick agreed, and they hung up. Solomon sensed a swirl of conflicting emotions: discomfort, anger, determination. He was a quiet philanthropist, not one to relish power moves. Yet something inside him insisted that, if he didn't stand firm, the cycle of mistreatment would simply roll on word of Solomon's. Ordeal reached the digital space in record time. Alicia's post sparked it. She included a picture of Solomon dignified, even as security hovered near him, the sadness evident in his eyes. She captioned it, "Elderly black man, unjustly removed from Aarhus Starwind Airlines, flight number 279. He did nothing but sit quietly. We must do better." Within hours, that single post exploded. First, it gathered a modest number of retweets. Then bigger influencers caught wind, especially those championing social justice causes. Soon it was trending. Major news outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and smaller independent media channels began picking it up, especially once they learned that the man in the photo was not an anonymous traveler, but Solomon Green, a well-known philanthropist recognized for his educational grants and contributions to civil rights organizations. At first, Starwind Airlines' social media accounts responded with a generic statement: "We're investigating the matter and are committed to providing a safe and comfortable environment for all passengers that did little to quell the outrage. Comments flooded in. Safe for whom? Clearly not safe for a black man minding his own business. If Starwind can do this to a beloved philanthropist, imagine what they'll do to someone without influence. Boycott Starwind. Anonymous employees from Starwind began leaking internal memos to the press. Some indicated that a passenger in first class claimed Mr. Green was acting suspiciously, possibly threatening. The staff apparently took it at face value, citing zero tolerance for any perceived threat. But no details or evidence surfaced to corroborate the complaint. The swirling rumors suggested racial profiling, prompting civil rights groups to demand accountability. Inside Starwind's headquarters, panic brewed. Executives scrambled to do damage control. Some recognized that the man they had ejected was tied to one of their biggest investors. The CFO's phone lines lit up. The PR director was inundated with calls. They realized the potential financial ramifications of losing critical investment capital, particularly from philanthropic and ethical investors. If the story continued to blow up, it could tarnish Starwind's brand permanently. While Solomon waited in the terminal for the evening flight, he received a personal call from the president of Starwind Airlines, a man named Russell Harding. Harding tried to mask the anxiety in his voice with forced warmth. "Mr. Green, I'd like to personally apologize for today's incident. It appears there was a misunderstanding and an overreaction by our crew. Please know this does not reflect our values." Solomon listened, expression unreadable. "If it doesn't reflect your values, perhaps you need better training and procedures. One vague complaint, and I'm off the plane like a criminal." Harding's tone was contrite. "You're absolutely right. We are conducting an urgent review of this matter. Please understand how seriously we take this. We'd be honored to have you remain a partner with us. I'm prepared to discuss renewed terms, investment returns and philanthropic collaborations, whatever it takes to make this right." Solomon answered without missing a beat. "Mr. Harding, this isn't merely a financial transaction. It's about respect and fair treatment. I don't want special treatment for myself. I want systemic changes that ensure no one else experiences such humiliation." He outlined his demands. 1. A full public apology, not just to him, but to passengers who witnessed the injustice. A formal investigation into the crew's decision and the passengers' complaint. 3. A clear plan to retrain Starwind staff on bias and discrimination. 4. A substantial donation to a civil rights fund to be directed by Solomon's Foundation, earmarked for anti-discrimination efforts in the aviation industry. Harding hesitated. The demands were significant. Yet with the storm raging on social media, refusing them might spell corporate disaster. So he promised to bring them to the board immediately, hoping to quell the scandal. After the call, Solomon felt a pang of satisfaction. Perhaps for once, a large corporation would be forced to back its high-minded rhetoric with tangible action. He was not naive. He knew they were motivated by the fear of losing billions rather than a sudden moral awakening. Still, if that fear drove real change, it might be enough. As the hours crawled by in the airport lounge, reporters and curious onlookers began to show up. Some recognized Solomon from his philanthropic work and approached for interviews. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust in his face. At first, he was reluctant to speak publicly, but after considering it, he recognized the power of his voice and the moment. If sharing his story could shine a spotlight on everyday injustices, so be it. He gave a brief, measured statement recounting the events. "I was removed without cause from Starwind Flight 279. I am disappointed and hurt, But this isn't about me alone. It's about anyone who can be labeled suspicious simply because of prejudice. He underscored the need for corporate accountability and anti-discrimination policies. Moments later, a small group wearing T-shirts emblazoned with NAACP approached him. They introduced themselves as local members of the Atlanta chapter. Word had reached them, and they were there to show solidarity. They offered support, legal counsel if needed, and promised to rally behind him should he choose to pursue legal action. Solomon thanked them, touched by their swift response. Yet amid the show of support, hidden foes lurked. A well-dressed man approached with a camera crew and a microphone, bearing the logo of a sensationalist tabloid news outlet. With a pushy demeanor, he demanded, "Mr. Green, do you think you were singled out? Because you're a threat or because you're black?" Is it possible the staff were just doing their job to keep everyone safe? Solomon's eyes narrowed. The man's phrasing reeked of insinuation, reminiscent of coded language that implied a scapegoating tactic. He responded calmly, "Safety is paramount, but so is evidence. I was labeled suspicious with no cause. My only wrongdoing was taking my seat." The reporter attempted a few more jabs, but Solomon's composure gave him no sensational meltdown to exploit. Eventually the man stalked away, disappointed. Finally, as dusk settled over the airport, Solomon's evening flight, the one Starwind had rebooked him on was preparing to board. By now the entire gate area was aware of who he was. Some onlookers watched with empathy, others with curiosity. Several recognized him. From social media posts, Starwind had offered to escort him privately onto the plane, but he declined. He refused to accept any measure that further singled him out, even if it was preferential. At the gate, a new flight crew greeted him with polite smiles. No one commented on the earlier incident, though it was obvious they all knew. Solomon found his seat in First Class 2A and settled in. He felt uneasy. This airline he had once respected, indeed, partially funded, had inflicted a deep wound. Sitting now in their first-class cabin felt both ironic and uncomfortable, a band-aid over the raw cut of injustice. Minutes before takeoff, the flight's purser, an older woman named Esther, approached. She knelt beside his seat, hands folded. "Mr. Green, I wanted to personally say how sorry I am for what happened earlier. I've flown with Starwind for over a decade, and this is not what we stand for." Solomon's gaze softened. "I appreciate that, I truly do. But it clearly happened, and it shouldn't happen to anyone." Esther nodded. "You're right, it shouldn't. I just want you to know I'm doing everything I can to ensure we treat you and everyone else with respect and kindness." He thanked her. As the plane lifted off, climbing above the glittering Atlanta skyline, Solomon reflected on the day's surreal events. His eyes drifted to the window, glimpsing the city lights. He wondered how many people below in that vast city had faced similar indignities, but lacked the power to fight back. Perhaps in some strange way, this incident was the impetus for him to leverage his position to effect real change. While Solomon soared through the night sky toward New York across the country, a dramatic board meeting was unfolding in a high-rise conference room at Starwind's headquarters in Chicago. The executive leadership president Russell Harding, CFO Meredith Lowry, and various board members were convened in an emergency session to handle the PR crisis. "We can't afford to lose that $4 billion, said the CFO. Her voice was strained, her posture rigid. "Our expansions in Asia. The new fleet upgrades the sustainability programs. Everything rides on that funding." Another board member, an older man with a reputation for no-nonsense tactics, slammed his palm on the table. "This is a fiasco. Who in the world decided to throw that man off the plane? We're paying the price for one flight crew's incompetent judgment call. Harding sighed, massaging his temples. It's not just the crew. Some passenger started this by complaining about Mr. Green. The crew claims they followed protocol to handle a security threat. It was obviously flawed. That passenger was paranoid, and the crew escalated it incorrectly. Meredith Lowry's lips curled in disdain. Regardless of how it happened, we have a major problem. We've lost the trust of a powerful philanthropist. The optics are horrendous. Removing an older black man for no apparent reason. The public outcry is intensifying. They want an official apology, compensation, diversity training. Some might even call for the crew to be fired. A moment of silence hung in the room. Then Harding straightened in his seat. All right, folks, we've received a list of demands from Mr. Green himself. We either meet them or risk our entire investment from his foundation's stake. Let's weigh our options. Option 1. We comply with everything. We do. The apology, pay the donation, retrain staff. That may stem the bleeding. Option 2. We stonewall or half-measure it, and potentially face lawsuits, boycotts, and a meltdown in investor confidence. The board must decide, and quickly. A younger board member, new to the table, dared to speak. President Harding, wouldn't a robust apology and a retraining program be the morally right thing to do anyway? We talk about wanting to be an inclusive airline. Here's our chance to demonstrate it. Yes, it'll be expensive, but the alternative is far worse for both finances and conscience. Harding exchanged a look with Meredith. They saw the logic. The debate continued for hours, but ultimately the board came to the consensus that meeting Solomon's demands was the only viable path. The public was already clamoring for it. Investors were already restless. The brand's very survival depended on swift action. They drafted a formal plan, a press conference, announcing a thorough investigation, immediate suspension of any staff found at fault, a multi-million-dollar commitment to civil rights training, and a substantial donation to a fund of Solomon's choosing. The final question was, would it be enough to quell the outrage and keep that $4 billion in place? In the early hours of the morning, Solomon's flight touched down at New York's JFK International Airport. He was exhausted physically and emotionally. Stepping off the plane, he expected a quiet journey home. Instead, a flurry of reporters lay in wait. News traveled that he would be arriving on this flight. As soon as he entered the arrivals area, flashes of cameras erupted. Microphones and cell phones were thrust toward him. The crowd peppered him with questions. Mr. Green, have you decided to sue Starwind? Mr. Green, do you believe this was a racist incident? What do you say about calls to boycott the airline? Solomon held up a hand. Fatigue etched on his face. I thank you for your concern. At this moment, I just want to go home and rest. I will address these questions soon, but tonight I ask for your respect and patience. Not wanting to be rude, he gave a quick statement. I have been in contact with Starwind executives. We are working toward a resolution that ensures no one else experiences what I did. Then he gently moved past them, aided by airport staff who kept the reporters at bay. Outside, a sleek black car awaited him. Sent by Frederick, presumably, the driver offered a polite nod and helped Solomon place his luggage in the trunk. As he settled into the back seat, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. Finally, he was away from the cameras, away from the spectacle. The city lights flickered as they drove away from the airport, crossing the highways toward the quieter suburbs where Solomon lived. His thoughts circled back to everything that had transpired since that morning. It felt like months, but it had only been a matter of hours. Discrimination had escalated into a national conversation about corporate accountability and the power of philanthropy. He believed in second chances, but also in consequences, for now all he wanted was a warm shower, a comforting meal, and the familiar embrace of his family. When he arrived home, dawn was breaking. His daughter Angela had stayed up, her eyes rimmed with worry. "Dad," she exclaimed the moment he stepped in. She hugged him tightly, holding on to him, as if afraid he might vanish. "I heard what happened. I saw the news." Solomon returned her embrace. "I'm fine," he assured her softly. Tired but fine, she helped him inside, where a pot of tea waited on the kitchen table. Over steaming mugs, they talked in hushed tones about the day's events. Angela was furious, calling it blatant racism. Solomon tried to calm her. "Remember, anger can be a spark, but we need more than anger to build something lasting. We need action and change." As the morning rays filtered through the windows, he finally excused himself to rest. Lying in his bed, the tension in his body started to ease. He didn't know what the next steps would look like, but he was resolved to see them through. Some part of him suspected that his life's purpose had taken a sudden shift. This was about more than philanthropic grants. He might be forging a new path for millions who had endured similar indignities. 2 days later, Solomon's attorney, Patricia Wheeler, a formidable woman known for her fiery courtroom presence, rang him early. "We've received Starwind's official response. They want a meeting to propose a settlement and a public statement. They're practically begging for a ceasefire." Solomon was sitting in his study, sipping coffee. "Have they agreed to the conditions I asked for?" Patricia paused. "Most of them, they're drafting a public apology. They're committing to staff, retraining, and they've set aside a multi-million-dollar donation to your foundation. But they want you to remain as an investor without pulling funds." "Of course, that's their main request." Solomon exhaled, turning to stare at the framed photos on his desk, pictures of him with civil rights leaders, of him awarding scholarships, and of his beloved late wife. "I'll meet them, but I want to make sure this is more than lip service. If I keep those funds with them, they have to demonstrate real change, not just corporate spin." Patricia's voice held a steely edge. "I'll ensure every detail is in writing. We've got the leverage." Solomon. When the meeting was arranged, it was held via teleconference for expediency. On one side of the screen sat Solomon Patricia and Frederick Jacobs. On the other side, from Starwind's boardroom in Chicago, President Harding, CFO Meredith Lowry, and their legal counsel. The tension was palpable, even through the digital interface. Harding began with a prepared statement, offering a deep and sincere apology to Solomon. He emphasized that Starwind was horrified by the incident and had suspended the flight crew pending a thorough investigation. He ended with a note of personal regret. "We never intended to tarnish your name or cause you distress. Mr. Green, we were reacting to a passenger's complaint that was apparently unfounded. We have learned from this painful event." Next, CFO Lowry presented the tangible offers. A $25 million donation to the Green Foundation for Civil Rights and Education. The philanthropic arm Solomon chaired dispersed over the next 5 years. The immediate rollout of a bias and diversity training program for all Starwind employees from the executive level down to ground staff with a scheduled annual recertification, a personal invitation for Solomon and his advisors to join Starwind's Corporate Social Responsibility CSR panel, ensuring direct input on ethical and inclusive policies. Finally, Harding broached the investment. "We respectfully request that you maintain your stake with us, Mr. Green. We value our partnership. We want to prove we can uphold the principles you champion." Solomon remained quiet for a long moment. He recalled the humiliation, the watchful eyes of security, the old pain of racial profiling resurrected by that experience. On the other hand, he saw an opportunity to drive real change in the heart of a major airline. If he withdrew the $4 billion, it would indeed punish them, and might serve as a stark warning to other corporations. But what then? Starwind might collapse, or simply recover eventually, with no structural transformation. Conversely, if he stayed invested, he could demand accountability from within, shaping their policies for years to come. With a measured tone, he spoke, "I appreciate your apology. I'm not interested in punishing for punishment's sake. I want meaningful reforms. If I keep my foundation's funds in Starwind, I need guarantees. Our seat on the CSR panel isn't just symbolic. We want veto power on any policy changes regarding diversity and inclusion. I want an annual public report on how you're addressing discrimination claims. And your staff must be held to a zero-tolerance standard for racial profiling enforced by third-party oversight. If these conditions aren't met, my foundation will pull every last cent." Harding and Lowry exchanged quick glances. The demands were significant, but they recognized they had no choice. "We agree," Harding said at length, sounding resigned, yet earnest. "We'll formalize these terms immediately." The tension in the virtual room eased. Patricia nodded in professional satisfaction. Frederick's face showed relief that they'd found a constructive path forward. Solomon allowed himself a faint smile. This was the best outcome he could have hoped for. A chance, not just to punish wrongdoing, but to foster genuine progress. Following the meeting, Starwind Airlines went live with a press conference. President Harding stood before dozens of cameras delivering the public apology with contrition. He specifically named Solomon Green, acknowledging the airline's mishandling of the situation and praising Solomon's philanthropic legacy. He pledged the $25 million donation to the Green Foundation and unveiled the extensive anti-bias training and oversight measures that would transform the airline's internal culture. The press coverage was explosive. Many lauded Starwind's swift response. Critics pointed out that, if not for Solomon's influence and wealth, they might never have apologized or reformed. Still, it sparked a larger conversation about racial profiling in air travel. Stories emerged from passengers of color who had faced similar indignities over the years. The hashtag #Wowza Flying While Black trended, fueling demands for standardized anti-discrimination protocols across all airlines. In Washington, D.C., a group of senators announced plans to revisit federal regulations regarding airline passenger complaints, aiming to address potential racial biases. Consumer rights organizations demanded that carriers provide clearer guidelines on when a passenger should be removed. Even the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) hinted at new rules about documenting incidents to prevent abuse of suspicion claims. Through it all, Solomon maintained a dignified silence, declining dozens of interview requests. He believed the actions spoke for themselves. The press had enough material to work with the stunning story of a quiet, elderly black philanthropist who had leveraged his power to hold a corporate giant accountable. Meanwhile, Starwind's stock, initially battered by the scandal, started to stabilize as news of the settlement and reforms spread. In the weeks that followed, Solomon found his life transformed. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers flooded his mail with letters of gratitude and respect. Many shared their own stories of discrimination, seeking solace in the example he set. Some criticized him for allowing Starwind off the hook by not pulling the entire $4 billion. Solomon couldn't please everyone, but he held firm. Real change often demanded engagement rather than withdrawal. On a personal level, he felt a sense of closure about events in his life long past. As a child, he had watched his father endure humiliations with stoic resolve. Now, in his twilight years, Solomon had turned a moment of injustice into a vehicle for progress, symbolically righting a lifetime of wrongs. He understood that prejudice could resurface at any moment in any place, but the best antidote was unwavering resolve and strategic action. He spent more time with family. His grandchildren, curious about the sudden media attention, peppered him with questions. "Grandpa, why did they think you were suspicious?" He tried to explain the complexities of racism and bias in a way they could understand, emphasizing the importance of fighting for fairness and dignity. One day, his youngest granddaughter, Simone, looked at him with wide eyes and said, "I'm proud of you, Grandpa." That simple statement warmed him more than any public accolade possibly could. A bizarre postscript emerged a month later. Investigative journalists, spurred by the hype around the story, identified the passenger who initially complained about Solomon. He was a businessman named Kevin Rourke, a frequent flyer in first class. According to leaked interviews, Rourke claimed he felt Solomon looked out of place and acted oddly, which made him nervous. He tried to rationalize his paranoia by mentioning news reports of airline disturbances, but the media spotlight didn't spare him. He was swiftly labeled a bigot. As this detail came to light, social media rained down condemnation on Rourke, who ended up publicly apologizing as well. Ironically, it turned out that Rourke's own company, an import-export firm, had just inked a major shipping deal with a subsidiary of Starwind. With the scandal swirling, that deal faced immediate scrutiny. Starwind, in an attempt to distance itself from the fiasco, cancelled the contract with Rourke's firm, citing a breach of trust. The fiasco cost him millions, and he eventually resigned under pressure. It was a stark lesson. The seeds of discrimination could bloom into poisonous outcomes, even for the one who planted them. With the Starwind scandal slowly fading from the headlines, Solomon continued his philanthropic work. The new seat on Starwind's CSR panel allowed him to push for comprehensive changes. He insisted on improved diversity in hiring mentorship programs for minority employees and ongoing partnerships with community organizations. Other airlines feeling the heat began reaching out to the Green Foundation for advice on preemptive measures to avoid similar controversies. Airlines introduced updated training modules to address unconscious bias among flight crews. Some even hired external consultants to revamp passenger complaint protocols. Solomon's name became synonymous not just with generosity, but also with tough, effective advocacy. He realized that the hard karma the user might want was not just about punishing bigots or incompetent corporate employees. True karmic justice arrived in the form of systemic improvements that prevented future harm. That in the end was the real victory. A crisp autumn breeze swept through the courtyard of the Green Foundation headquarters in New York City as Solomon walked along a row of newly planted magnolia trees. The rustle of golden leaves overhead brought him back to a simpler time. Childhood afternoons, beneath the shade of the oak tree in his parents' yard. That memory, that sense of history, grounded him in his purpose. Weeks after the settlement, the foundation received the first tranche of Starwind's $25 million donation. On a symbolic day marking Solomon's 77th birthday, they officially launched the Soaring Equity Initiative, a program dedicated to eradicating racial discrimination in global travel. The initiative aimed to collaborate with airlines worldwide, offering structured frameworks for handling passenger complaints, mandatory bias training for flight crews, and robust community engagement. Leading civil rights attorneys, educators, and retired airline professionals formed the advisory board. Solomon insisted that the initiative focus not just on reacting to incidents, but on preventing them from ever occurring. Within Starwind Airlines, the reform process was daunting. Flight attendants, new hires and veterans alike took part in immersive workshops, learning to recognize microaggressions and biases. The corporation's board reviewed guidelines on how to handle passenger complaints more responsibly. No longer could a single baseless accusation uproot someone from their seat without due assessment. Passengers who lodged false complaints faced consequences too, from fines to being placed on internal no-fly lists. Public awareness campaigns ran on social media, with Starwind staff openly discussing the lessons they had learned. Across the broader aviation industry, other carriers felt the ripple effect. The FAA, after months of consultations and public input, enacted new regulations requiring airlines to log detailed evidence before removing any passenger airlines that violated these regulations, risked fines and license reviews. Solomon, with a soft chuckle, recalled his father's words. Sometimes you've got to stir the pot to change the flavor. Indeed, this single incident had stirred a mighty pot, leading to a cross-industry re-evaluation of how travelers were treated. The final piece of the puzzle, accountability for the crew members who removed Solomon, unfolded quietly. While Starwind's internal investigation noted that they had followed protocol, it also identified lapses in judgment and lack of verification. The lead steward, Mr. Daniels, who had commanded Solomon to leave, faced disciplinary action. His record now held a serious mark for discriminatory conduct, and he was removed from any passenger-facing role. The airline promised he would receive extensive remedial training before being reassigned. Some called for his firing. Solomon, however, requested leniency. He believed that punishing individuals without educating them was a wasted opportunity. That, too, was part of the soaring equity. Initiative's ethos transform systems and people rather than merely discarding them. One bright morning, some months after the ordeal, Solomon was invited to speak at the grand opening of Starwind's new community center in Chicago, a project funded by part of the donation. Stepping onto the polished stage in a large auditorium, he gazed at the attendees, corporate executives, community leaders, activists and Starwind employees of all ranks. Applause greeted him. He took the podium with calm grace, a hush falling over the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice resonating. We are here today because we faced a moment of truth, a moment that revealed our shortcomings and the urgent need for change, but we did not let that moment break us. We harnessed its power to forge something greater. A commitment to ensuring the skies belong to everyone, free from fear or prejudice. He paused, scanning the audience. We must remember that every passenger is a human being with a story. We must strive to see them not as threats by default, but as fellow travelers on life's journey. When we foster trust and understanding, we not only honor our passengers, but we elevate our own humanity. A wave of emotion rippled through the auditorium. Some employees blinked back tears, recalling the viral video of Solomon's removal. Others clapped loudly, energized by the transformation that was taking shape within the airline. My father always told me, Solomon continued, that dignity isn't something we wait for others to grant us. We must claim it for ourselves. And when someone tries to rob us of that dignity, we must respond with integrity, wisdom, and resolve. By doing so, we uplift the entire community. Applause thundered through the space, outside the city of Chicago, buzzed with its usual energy, a testament to progress and adversity coexisting in the hustle of daily life. But inside that auditorium, for a brief moment, everyone was united by the humbling power of a shared vision, fair skies for every person, regardless of their background. As the event ended, Harding approached Solomon, extending his hand. "Thank you for sticking with us, Mr. Green. You showed us how to be better." Solomon met the handshake. "We still have a long journey ahead. Let's keep flying in the right direction." With that, the next chapter began. For Solomon, for Starwind, and for everyone watching from the sidelines, proof that a single act of injustice, when confronted with courage and principle, could transform an entire institution. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this roller coaster of injustice, awakening, and ultimate triumph. Solomon Green's story teaches us the power one person holds, even against a giant corporation, when fueled by dignity, integrity, and purpose. We saw how a single phone call can spark a revolution, shaking a multinational airline to its core. But we also witnessed that true victory comes not just from punishment, but from forging lasting change. If Solomon's journey inspired you, if it reminded you to speak up against unfairness and stand firm on your principles, help us spread this powerful lesson. Like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel to stay updated on more incredible stories that challenge our understanding of justice and humanity. Together, let's champion respect, empathy, and equality in every realm of our world. Safe travels, and remember, dignity always finds its wings.